Muslims and other Paul haters will often say that Paul himself admitted that he was a liar, that he straight up confessed in his own letters to being deceptive, so when he claims to have seen the risen Jesus, or that Jesus is the Son of God and the cross brings forgiveness, we shouldn't take him very seriously. After all, Paul himself already told us that he's a fraud. So what passages are they talking about? The go-to is Romans 3:7. But if through my lie the truth of God abounded to his glory, why am I still being judged as a sinner? They will fixate on the phrase, my lie, like Paul is waving a flag and admitting that he made the whole thing up. But Paul is not at all endorsing this logic. He's absolutely dismantling it. And the very next verse makes it obvious. Why not say, as we are slanderously reported as saying, let us do evil that good may come. Their condemnation is deserved. That's Paul calling out people who twist his words, which is exactly what this objection is stupidly doing. Next up, 2 Corinthians 12:16. Crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery. Muslims and Paul haters will say, you see, Paul admits that he deceived the Corinthians. But if you know Paul, this is pure sarcasm. You know that this is his tone. He's mocking an accusation being made against him, and the context is that Paul refused financial support from the Corinthians. He didn't want to burden them, but apparently some people were spreading the idea that even though Paul didn't take their money directly, he must have been scheming them some other way. So what does Paul do? He leans into the sarcasm. Granted, I didn't burden you, but of course I'm such a crafty guy, I must have tricked you somehow. He's not confessing, he's mocking the stupidity of the charge, then he immediately shuts it down by pointing to his very own actions. Did I exploit you through anyone I sent? Did Titus take advantage of you? Didn't we act in the same spirit? So not only does Paul deny the accusation, he brings in witnesses, and the whole point is that his conduct was consistent, open, and honest. Next up, we have 1 Corinthians 9:20-22. To the Jews I became as a Jew, and to those under the law as one under the law. To those outside the law as one outside the law. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. This one gets used to say that Paul is a chameleon, changing who he is depending on who's watching. So he obviously must be a fake. But Paul isn't talking about lying here, he's talking about adapting his approach so that he can reach people where they're at. And we don't even have to guess what this looks like, we can watch him do it in the book of Acts. In Acts 22, Paul is addressing a hostile crowd at the Jewish temple. This situation is super tense, so he's strategic in how he speaks. He opens up in Aramaic, their very own heart language, and respectfully calls them brothers and fathers. He says he was raised in Jerusalem, trained under Gamaliel, a name that would have carried serious weight. He refers to the law of our ancestors and says that he was zealous for God as any of you are today. Even when describing Ananias, the man who helped him after his conversion, Paul calls him a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living here. He delays mentioning Gentiles until the very end, verse 21, and as soon as he does, the crowd erupts again. Paul was carefully building common ground so they would at least hear him out for as long as possible. That's exactly what it looks like to become a Jew to reach the Jews. He's not faking anything. Everything he says is true. He's just choosing which details to lead with. But when you see him in Acts 26, just a few chapters later, the situation flips. Now Paul is speaking before Agrippa and Roman officials with no risk of riot, no crowd to appease. So he's calm, he takes his time to develop his points, and he goes a completely different route. He doesn't even mention Ananias, because why would a Roman official care about some Jewish guy? He openly refers to the Jews as his accusers and adversaries, and even paints a sharp contrast between them and the Christians he used to persecute. He calls Christians saints and says that he used to force them to blaspheme and hunted them down, so he's not soft-pedaling anything. And unlike in Acts 22, Paul doesn't hesitate to talk about his mission to the Gentiles. He also points out that Jesus spoke to him in Aramaic on the road to Damascus, making it pretty clear that Paul is now speaking Greek to Agrippa. It's clear that he's tailoring his message to his audience, not lying, which is exactly what 1 Corinthians 9 is describing. What's striking is that the speeches don't read like polished inventions. They sound real, situation-specific summaries, the kind someone who was there would actually remember. That kind of natural variation is exactly what you would see in genuine historical reporting. Finally, there's a bit of a trickier one. In 1 Corinthians 9, Paul says that he would rather die than take financial support, but that in 2 Corinthians 11, he admits that he got help from the Macedonians while he was in Corinth. Sounds suspicious, so what exactly is going on here? Corinth was a wealthy, status-obsessed city. If you were a public speaker or a teacher, people assumed that you were just in it for clout and money. Paul absolutely knew that, so when he planted the church there, he made a point of not taking their money, not because it was wrong to be supported, as he argues, but because he didn't want anyone saying that he was just another traveling hustler. He even says in 2 Corinthians, "Was it a sin that I humbled myself so that you could be exalted?" They were offended that he wouldn't let them support him. That's how twisted and weird their values were. But what gets interesting here is that in Acts 18, Luke tells us Paul worked as a tent maker when he first arrived in Corinth, and he only preached on Sabbaths, basically part-time ministry. But then Silas and Timothy show up from Macedonia, and suddenly Paul shifts to preaching full-time. But Luke never cares to tell us why. But when we look at 2 Corinthians 11:9, Paul does tell us. He says that when he was in need, the brothers from Macedonia supplied what he lacked so he could keep ministering in Corinth without ever taking money from them directly. All of this fits perfectly. Acts gives you the timing, Paul's letters give you the motive, and neither author calls attention to this connection. That's not something that you would get by editing your story to sound consistent. It's the exact kind of subtle interlock that you would only get when both accounts are reporting real events and not made-up stories and Christian propaganda. So in all four cases, the whole Paul admitted that he was a liar claim completely falls apart, and the more that we look at the accounts in Acts, the more that they look like actual history. If you find these videos helpful, feel free to check out my Patreon and consider joining. You'll get early access to videos before they come out, be a part of our private group chat, and you'll help me to continue to put out content that spreads and defends the gospel. Thank you so much for watching.